I'm Brian Hickson, the Neuroscience Director of the Brain Performance Center. I'm going to talk about right now the 5 different types of brain physiology at the core of attention deficit. From a neuroscience perspective, attention deficit is purely a symptom. There's 5 different types of physiology that can cause attention deficit. Not everyone is the same. That's why it's so important to do imaging of the brain and understand your unique situation and how your neurons are firing and the functional states of the brain that can cause different forms of attention deficit. So what we're going to do is look at some of those different states. So first of all, real quick, just a quick understanding of how brain waves work. So again, you have 5 different types of brain waves. They almost work like gears in a car as you shift from first gear all the way to fifth gear. These are the first ones called delta waves. Delta waves are your autonomic nervous system. These are not thinking waves. These are the slowest waves that the brain produces, and these regulate things like your sleep cycles or your digestion, your hormonal regulation, immune function, everything about your autonomic nervous system. So these are controlling those things. The theta waves are a little bit faster wave, but they're still considered slow waves. These are the first conscious waves, but these are produced when you're first waking up in the morning. These are produced when you're daydreaming. These are produced when you're falling asleep at night. These are like the brakes of your brain that slows you down, fatigues you, and starts to get you ready for sleep or transition from asleep to awake. And then you have these alpha waves. Alpha waves are these slow, neutral waves that when the brain is fully awake, but it's fully present, but it's not engaged in activity. So these are great for meditation, for taking 20, 30 minutes out of your day to slow down and to be still and relax. These are great for letting things go and taking a deep breath and kind of resetting. But these again are neutral waves, so they're not great for engaging in work or in schoolwork or different things around us where there's problem solving and we need to engage. And then we have beta brainwaves. Beta brainwaves are the faster brainwaves now that allow us to get things done. These allow us to process information. These allow us to encode memories, to pay attention. We need these for all executive function. And then we have the high beta. And high beta is when it's gone up too far now, and these are into more the fight or flight states. So these are fine for if you were hiking and a mountain lion came out and you had to get out of there. These are the waves you would want to produce. These give you faster speeds, more adrenaline, faster reaction speed, but these are not good for processing information, recalling information. You don't want to produce these when you're having a test at school or doing a performance in front of a lot of people at work or things like that. So again, these different brain waves work like gears in a car. We want to shift between these different ones depending on what we're doing in that state right then. So what we use is EEG. EEG is a form of neuroimaging or brain imaging that can record the function of the brain. It actually records the electrical activity, how much is coming up and how much is going down. It's very similar to what an EKG is to the heart. EEG to the brain is what an EKG is to the heart. This records the resting state. In an EKG for the heart rate, we know that when you stress the heart or you run, your heart rate goes up, but it should return back to a resting state. If it stays at rest too high, it's stressing the heart all the time. If it's too low, it's under functioning. Same thing with the brain. We want each of those waves to be able to come up at times, but they come back down. When you're sleeping, you want those delta waves to come way up and down every 90 minutes through your sleep cycles. When you're coming out of sleep, you want theta to come up a little bit and let you transition to awake. When you're meditating or relaxing, you want alpha to come up and then come back down. When you're engaging in activities where it's requiring problem solving and attention and focus and memory, we want those beta waves to come up. If we're in a high beta state or a fight or flight state, we want those high betas to come up to get us out of a situation that might be a threat to us. So each of those need to come up and down. We don't want any of them to get stuck. So EEG can measure based on your same age and gender, are you producing the right amount of those waves, or are you producing too much or too little? And again, especially with attention deficit, it's so important to get an age normed database so we can look and see how a certain age group normally should respond and how you're necessarily responding. So what we can look at here first is when we get these brain maps back, if they're producing too much delta waves, again, that's offsetting, that's producing too much at an awake state, which is going to create a hypervigilant state in the autonomic nervous system. And the main thing that's going to do for as far as attention deficit is it's going to throw off sleep cycles. So we're not getting into the deepest sleep cycles. When you don't get into the deepest sleep cycles, you're not getting rid of the metabolic waste, you're not getting into the cleansing and the restoring, the repair that the brain needs, and what you end up having is attention deficit symptoms such as fatigue, chronic fatigue and brain fog where you can't think quite as sharp, slower processing, lower motivation for things, emotional reactivity at times, or poor impulse control. All these are common things that if we're not getting into deep sleep cycles, all of us are going to have. And so many people have this because they're not getting into this slow wave sleep where it really does most of the repair of the brain. We have a large center at Oaks Christian School in Westlake Village, and probably 20% of the attention deficit work we do shows up in brain maps as these slow wave problems where the kids are not getting enough sleep. Again, this is not just going to bed on time and waking up enough time, and actually getting the quantity of sleep. This is actually the quality of those sleep cycles and how the brain's regulating those. So we can look at that. We can also, like I said, this shows where the brain shrinks down during those deepest stages of sleep and the cerebral spinal fluid penetrates through, cleansing out that metabolic waste. When that metabolic waste starts to build up, it starts to accumulate in the actual membrane of the neuron. And when it does, it starts to slow down cell-to-cell signaling, which slows down all the neurotransmitters, including the more inhibitory neurotransmitters, including the excitatory neurotransmitters. We have lower energy. We have lower ability to stop ourselves from being reactive about things and impulsive. As we go on to the next waves here, if we see that the brain is stuck producing too much theta waves at an awake state all day long, if it's producing these slow, sleepier theta waves right over the attention network, it's going to slow down our attention. This would be like trying to hike a mountain and having a 40-pound backpack on. It slows us down. These are meant to slow us down to go to sleep. These aren't meant to be able to focus and pay attention. This is like trying to drive a car with the brakes slightly on. So it can cause things like poor attention and focus. It can cause more fidgeting and constant movement. This is when our brain feels almost like it's going to go to sleep, so we have to move around and stimulate ourselves. We can't just sit still and relax and pay attention. So movement is a natural consequence of some of this activity. It's going to lower executive function. Again, because if we were tired and fatigued and our brain's producing those type of waves when it shouldn't, it's going to cause a lot of those things. It can cause procrastination and poor time management and working memory and all these things. So again, this is very typical of what we see with attention deficit right here. And you can see it can be just a small little area. It's not necessarily the whole brain. One little area can affect the whole attention area of the brain. As we go to alpha waves again are great for meditation, for just those few moments of stilling the brain. But again, this is like a car in neutral. If it's not going, it won't be able to encode memories, it won't be able to pay attention, it's just shifting on this neutral. This is the kid that's sitting there in class and the teacher's starting to talk and they're just shifting off into kind of la-la land. They're off into daydreaming. It's very hard to switch attention back, to initiate attention. It's slower processing speeds because they're producing all these neutral waves. Again, these are great for a few moments, but they're not good for all day long. And so we want to be able to address this activity, and there's a lot of different ways we can address this to get this down, and then their brain shifts very normal. As we get into beta waves, so beta waves, when it's stuck up high, is going to be a little bit more towards anxiety. So anxiety waves can look very much like attention deficit, where the brain's very distracted, it's thinking, it's overthinking, it's processing information, it's looking at whatever it can. It's not able to control its focus. So it's a difficult time just sitting there being present and listening to the teacher when the brain's just racing, and anything that's a little bit more interesting, the brain goes to. It can cause, definitely these thinking loops too. So you can be very distracted internally as well. But again, this is a form that's a little bit more towards anxiety, and it can still cause attention deficit. As we look at high beta waves can cause a lot of internal anxiety, significant anxiety. It can cause panic attacks. It can cause pain or headaches that are constant, fear, the feeling of threat. These again are the waves that we should produce when we're being chased by a mountain lion, or we're trying to get out of a situation. But a lot of people that have experienced either trauma, sometimes concussions, will have this type of activity, and they're just sitting there and they're experiencing these underlying survival type feelings of threat when they're in a safe situation. And that can really derail the brain from thinking and processing in school and work because of this type of underlying activity. And we can see that right in the high beta when we do a brain map. So again, if we see diffuse high activity, we can address it with different things like magnesium deficiency for very specific things. Based on the amount of activity, we can actually specify the exact amount of the dose to be able to counter that and bring that down. Is it neuroinflammation, the difference between the omega-3 and 6 ratio in the cell membrane that might be initiating too much cortisol throughout the body? Is it poor sleep cycles? Can we look at their actual sleep hygiene or look at their sleep cycles, and is there a real problem with the brain, the way it's regulating that 90-minute sleep cycle? Heart rate variability, we can look at that. And then if it's diffuse low activity, is it possibly a omega-3 deficiency that's not producing enough connections between the neurons to fire off that electricity and hold that attention? Is it a methylation problem, MTHFR, that's not producing enough energy within the cell? Is it excess palmitic acid that's causing it, that can get clumped up inside of the membrane and slow down that cell-to-cell signaling as well? Is it a glutamate deficiency, which is due to usually lack of aerobic type exercise? But a lot of, probably 50% of the activity ends up being very focal, not diffuse, but a very one area. And usually on something like that, it's going to require EEG neurofeedback, where we can place a sensor in that area and retrain that back up or down, depending on what it is. It's just stuck producing too much. It'd be like a muscle that's just flexed all the time. We have to teach it to relax. It's very much like physical therapy for the brain. It's a level 1 efficacy for attention deficit according to the American Academy of Pediatrics. There's over 1,000 peer-reviewed studies on this, so it's very evident that we can actually train the brain. But again, we can only do that if it's focal activity. If it's focal activity, we can change it very quickly. If it's diffuse activity, we would need to address it more nutritionally or find out what the deficiency that's causing it. A brain map is so important to diagnosing and understanding what the physiology is underlying the attention problem. To do that, it's affordable. Under $500 for a brain map is such an important investment to really, again, addressing the problem and knowing what to do. It's a simple thing. It's under 45 minutes. It's non-invasive, and it's actionable. We can look at the brain, see how it's functioning, and create a plan that can actually get you to a place where, for some people, off medication, for some people it's the lowest amount of medication they need. For other people, if they're not even on medication, sometimes we can prevent them from even being able to go on medication. So again, medication's not the enemy, but we need to be able to look at what the physiology is. Is it requiring something like medication, or is it requiring something that's just a deficiency in the brain that we need to address either nutritionally or through neurofeedback, and we can reset it and hopefully lower, if not completely rid, the problem. So call our center and get a brain map. It's one of the most important things you can do as the start of a good plan for attention deficit.